Dualism, Matter and Spirit, from the book Intuition of the Absolute by Ananda. In my last lecture, I explained that the first object of Hindu philosophers was to investigate the cause of life and nature, and then to discover the best means of becoming one with that cause. That is to say, it is a search into the eternal nature of the human soul and an inquiry as to its ultimate destiny. Tonight I propose to take up the subject of the most ancient and most honored of Indian philosophies, the Samkhya. This word has two meanings, of which one is the enumeration of first principles, and the other, the discrimination of spirit from matter. The real founder of the system is absolutely unknown, but the germ of its teaching is to be found in verse 5, chapter 4 of the Shveta Upanishad of the Krishna Yajurveda, where several references to the Samkhya doctrine occur. But the Samkhya philosophy was first taught in a systematic form by Kapila, and for this reason he is regarded as its founder. It was Kapila who systematized it and placed it upon a rational basis. He was the first to collect the different ideas that were taught under the Samkhya system, and it was he who delivered it to the world. Very little is known regarding the facts of the founder's life. His father was a rishi called Kardama, and his mother's name was Devahudi. It was from her that he learned the rudiments of philosophy and all the varied teachings about the soul, the life hereafter, and the eternal God. Gradually, the teachings of the mother produced their results in him, and he took to a life of contemplation. Tradition says that in later life he destroyed the wicked sons of Sagara, the then reigning king, by means of his occult power. A likeness of Kapila has recently been found, sculptured in the rock in a cave temple which still exists in the district of Anuradhapura in Ceylon. It shows him sitting in his cave in an attitude of contemplation. He is said to have passed the remainder of his days on an island called Shagara, which is situated at the mouth of the river Ganges, about 90 miles from Calcutta. And every year, on the last day of the Sanskrit month Magha, at the time when the sun begins its northerly course and passes from Sagittarius into Capricornus, thousands of men and women visit the place where he meditated and gave the fruits of his meditation to Esuri, his disciple. Thus the tradition of his life is still kept up at the present day, and all Indians, especially the Hindus, worship his memory as a great saint and philosopher. As regards the date when he lived, according to Hindu tradition, he flourished about 5,000 years from now. That is more than 2,000 years before the birth of Buddha. Mention of him has been found in many Sanskrit books, and even those writers who are opposed to his doctrines allude to him with the greatest reverence, which proves how great his influence must have been in ancient India. The method followed in the Samkhya Sutra is preeminently logical. Kapila recognizes three modes of gaining knowledge: perception, inference, and revelation. Shabda. The existence of the world is proved by the testimony of the senses, and the existence of the cause of the world can be proved by inference. The existence of the soul is also proved by inference. Kapila regards the Vedas as revealed and cites Vedic texts as an infallible authority in support of all his theses, which are proved by perception and inference. By perception is meant the knowledge produced through the contact of the understanding and senses with objects. Our intellect assumes the form of the object which is presented before the mind by the senses. I see the ink pot because 1. The ink pot is within the range of my vision, and 2. My intellect spontaneously assumes the form of the ink pot. The soul becomes aware of the existence of the ink pot owing to the contribution of the form of the ink pot by the intellect and the contribution of the matter, color, etc. of the ink pot by the organ of sight. This is Kapila's theory of perception. See Sutra 89, Chapter 8. Inference is preceded by perception. The knowledge by inference is due to the unconditional and universal association between two observed facts. For instance, when we see smoke at a distance, we infer the existence of fire. Why? Because we know from experience that fire is always present where there is smoke. Thus, whenever we see an effect, we infer a cause. Because, as Kapila says, out of nothing something cannot arise. All perceptions are not logically valid. A perception can be vitiated in many ways. And as no inference is of any weight unless drawn from correct perceptions, it's useful to be acquainted with those conditions which tend to invalidate perceptions. For instance, the observer must not be very far away from the object to be observed, and his senses must be in the normal state. Neither can he obtain a correct picture of an object if he be too near it. The observer's mind must be scientifically trained and free from prejudices and undue leanings. Without a judicious balance of the mental faculties, no observer can draw truly scientific conclusions. Then again, we sometimes fail to see a thing even with the most powerful microscope when the size of the object is too small. It is for this reason that the atom is impossible of being observed. The interval of time is one of the most important factors in observation, and if the interval be too long, it is most probable that we shall not have any knowledge of the object. For this reason, people hesitate to accept the theory of the origin of the nebular system, or that of the origin of species. Lastly, a certain amount of what may be called pre-scientific intuition is necessary in order that facts may be collected and arranged with a view to bring them under a general principle. All great discoveries in science have been made by those who started their scientific career with a kind of intuition. Intuition creates the truths which the mind understands. Newton had the intuition of universal attraction, and his mind brought forth the mathematical laws of the falling bodies in order to confirm his intuitive conviction. Kapila teaches that in its phenomenal aspects, a thing changes, but in its causal aspect, it is indestructible and eternal. The cause of the phenomenal world is indestructible, but the world as seen by us is liable to the law of change. Kapila was the first philosopher who taught that the universe was evolved out of primal, undifferenced matter. Kapila's philosophy is characterized by a deep moral sentiment. Perfection is the aim of life, and perfection is to be obtained through the knowledge of the soul as distinct from matter. Virtue is the road to perfection. Happiness and peace are the rewards of a virtuous life. Discontent and misery are the result of a vicious life. No act is mortal, no thought perishes. The progress of the individual is determined by his actions. Man becomes angel by noble deeds, and beast by ignoble ones, for our deeds accompany us to the world beyond after physical death. Forgiveness is divine. There is no happiness higher than that which arises from forgiving others. Dispassion is worthy of the highest praise, and passion is to be condemned, because the offspring of attachment to the things of the not-self is evil, while great good arises from the philosophic virtues of dispassion, serenity, and contemplation. The transcendental grounds of Kapila's ethics are 1. Eternity of the soul, 2. Imperishability of human feelings, thoughts, and actions, 3. Rebirth according to the law of karma, and 4. Liberation as the ultimate goal of man. In proportion as man shuns evil and chooses good, as he knows his true self and renounces his false self, As he realizes freedom and ignores the shadowy pleasures of the senses, he approaches nearer and nearer to mukti, or liberation. Though Kapila accepted the authority of the Vedas as truths revealed to the rishis, see Sutra 46, Chapter 5, and 147, Chapter 1, he strongly protested against the authority of the priests. His great humanity led him to raise his voice against animal sacrifices, and he also taught that no sensible man should perform sacrifices with a view to entering into heaven after death, because by the law of rotation, those who go to heaven must return to earth. See Sutra 6, Chapter 1. The state of perfection cannot be attained by sacrifices, by offspring, or by charity, but only by renouncing that which by its nature is not eternal. I believe that Kapila also instituted the sannyas, or monastic system. Certainly, the trend of thought in the 4th chapter of the sutras inclines towards the renunciation of the world with a view to discovering the truths of spiritual life in the solitude of mountain and desert. He says that the yogi ought not to associate with many people, as such association may prove an obstacle to concentration. He next goes so far as to say that the sannyasin, one who has renounced, ought to live absolutely alone. Even living with one companion only is regarded as injurious to the interests of the soul. Chapter 4:10. All knowledge and all power is contained in the soul, and its glory is revealed in silence and solitude. You are your own friend, your own guide, your own teacher, and your own savior. Comfort yourself by yourself, raise yourself by yourself, educate yourself by yourself, and liberate yourself by yourself. I will now try to explain Kapila's teaching about the origin and development of the universe. Nothing is more difficult than to present old ideas in modern language, for as Max Mola somewhere says, ancient words are square and modern words are round. The subject will appear very complicated to you because the philosophical technicalities of the Sanskrit are quite different from the philosophical terms of English, French, German, or Norwegian. Even such words as mind, perception, immortality, and salvation have quite a different meaning in Sanskrit. Yet in order that you should understand the spirit of the Sanskrit darshanas, it is absolutely necessary that you should understand what each term connotes. The worth of a philosophy depends upon the meaning attached to the words used by the philosopher. Kapila's philosophy is called the Samkhya because it attempts to comprehend the universe as a sum total of 25 tattvas, principles, categories, substances. If you refer to the chart, you will understand how the world of phenomena has evolved out of the primal, undifferenced matter. Kapila starts with the existence of free spirits, Purusha, and an original unmanifested substance called prakriti, or nature, which was anterior to creation. Prior to evolution, the 3 gunas, forces, substances, or entities, called sattva, raja, and tama, mind, energy, and matter, were in prakriti, in a state of perfect equilibrium. Evolution begins as soon as spirits come in touch with prakriti. Both spirit and nature are inactive, but omnipresent, ubiquitous, and eternal. Only the former is conscious, the latter unconscious. The creative activity of prakriti is not its own, but is due to the approach of the spirit, just as a piece of white glass appears red if a rose is placed near it. So the very presence of Purusha is the sine qua non of creation by prakriti. Hence, there is no active will on the part of Purusha, neither is there any conscious desire on the part of prakriti to create the world. Action follows as a result of the meeting of 2 eternal entities. Prakriti, in its transcendental aspect, is called avyakta, the unmanifested, in its empirical aspect, Mahat, or the first great mind. Mahat is the evolution of the determinate from the indeterminate, the coming forth of the idea, the psyche, from the womb of its eternal ground, the manifestation of the cosmic reason from a disturbance in the equilibrium of the everlasting gunas. At this distance of time, it is difficult to understand what Kapila really meant by Mahat, the first development of Prakriti. A doubt arises as to whether Mahat is to be taken in the sense of a phase in the cosmic growth, containing within it the potentialities of life, will, body, as well as of the material world, or only pure mind and reason. Indian commentators incline to the latter view, pointing to the logical priority of conception over that which is conceived, of thought over that which is the object of thought, and of will before it became dynamic. Mahat is thought in which the form of thought and the movement of thought are held in equilibrium, just as Prakriti is substance in which power is locked up in idea, so that neither power nor idea can be said to have actual existence in the avyakta. The problem as to how avyakta is transformed into Mahat is inexplicable, unless we suppose that avyakta was pregnant with productivity, which is what Kapila says. In Mahat, says Kapila, Sattva, goodness and light, predominates, while Raja, energy, and Tama, inertia, darkness, and evil, are inactive and almost non-existent. Out of Mahat, the great mind, arises ahamkara, the subject, ego, I, or consciousness of self as a real power or doer, opposed to not self. The difference between Mahat and ahamkara is the difference between consciousness and self-consciousness, the former being the transcendental ground and logical presupposition of the latter. Out of the ahamkara arise the 5 tanmatras, or ethereal counterparts of the elements, which are 1. Subtle sound, 2. Subtle touch, 3. Subtle light, 4. Subtle taste, and 5. Subtle smell, and the 11 senses, viz. the 5 centers of perception: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. The 5 centers of action: grasping, walking, secretion, speech, and generation. Also the mind, i.e., the inner sense, which directs the 10 senses. These motor and sensitive centers are not to be confounded with the organs of sight, etc., and the organs of action, such as the hands, legs, etc. They are functions of mind, conjoined to the nervous system. They are psychonervous senses. Kapila says that these centers are invisible. They are situated inside the brain. Mind is regarded as the central power or faculty for receiving messages from the senses and for directing them to their respective objects. Out of the tanmatras arise the gross elements: ether, gas, heat, liquid, and solid. These gross elements, mahabhutas, appear to us as sky, atmosphere, light and heat, water and air. The tanmatras are the media between senses and objects, and their function is to act as excitants of nerve centers. Hence, each tanmatra differs in quality from every other tanmatra. For instance, the tanmatra which excites the eye to see the color of an object is quite different from the tanmatra which excites the auditory center to perceive the distinction between contralto and soprano. The mahabhutas elements have an extra mental and extra organic existence, but the tanmatras are like nerve and ether vibrations, interpenetrating matter and mind alike. This is Kapila's theory of the evolution of the world. Kapila's account of the development of the universe is neither idealistic nor materialistic, nor a compound of both. His theory is not idealistic because he does not believe in the evolution of matter and energy out of the soul. His theory is not materialistic because he does not evolve soul out of matter. His philosophy is not a compromise between idealism and materialism because he does not teach that souls and nature have come out of a common substance, call it God or universal mind. He does not consider that it is philosophically right to assume the existence of a God to account for the creation of the world. Just as milk flows from the udder of a cow at the side of her calf, and just as the spider weaves the cobweb out of its own body, so does nature create. Thus, Kapila's philosophy is known to Indian scholars as atheistic. But if you consider the matter well, you will not be able to class Kapila with ordinary atheists. Kapila recognizes the possibility of a personal God, along with the impossibility of proving his existence according to the canons of perceptive and inferential logic. If God were perfect, says Kapila, he would not feel the need of creating a world. If he were imperfect, an imperfect being cannot be called God. Neither would he have the power or intelligence to create a world. Hence it follows that Kapila's philosophy cannot be called theistic. But Kapila believes in the eternity of the soul, in the supremacy of jnana, divine wisdom, in the greatness of our moral sentiment, and in nature as working for man's highest good. It is not just to label his system pessimistic, for in that case, all philosophy, which starts with the assumption of the dimness of our religious vision, the narrowness of our sympathies, the weakness of our reasoning faculty, and, above all, of our liability to sickness, pain, and death, must be stigmatized as pessimistic. All philosophers, whether theistic or atheistic, are in search of a wisdom which, by its almightiness and by its saving quality, shall raise humanity from the depths of sin, folly, and ignorance to a level that is equal with the perfection and freedom of God Himself. It is a part of wisdom to recognize the imperfection of our human state. It is also a part of wisdom to hope for final liberation from all our limitations. Man is in reality divine, though apparently human. Kapila teaches that although our terrestrial life appears to be full of sorrow, yet it is not our true destiny to suffer. We are, in essence, eternally free, eternally wise, eternally living, and eternally holy. All this suffering, this sickness, old age, and death have come upon us as a result of our avivika, or unwisdom, our avairagya, or habitual attachment to sensual pleasures. We are the unwilling slaves of our phantom selves, the self of ignorance and the self of passion, those selves which are associated with a wrong notion of personality. Are we not quite contented with our silly opinions, silly comforts, silly conduct, and silly mode of life? Be wise and learn to entertain true opinions, to enjoy true comforts, and to lead a noble life. That which you call yourself is a ghost. Your true self is far more beautiful, far more divine. Realize your power and holiness, your inborn grandeur and your perfect wisdom. Your body should be your slave, not you the slave of your body. Your mind is an instrument of the soul. Let it not get the better of the soul. By ignorance is meant the belief that the soul shares the fate of the body and is incapable of being independent of karma, deeds, daiva, natural forces, and adrista, mysterious power. This ignorance flows like a perpetual stream down the ages, dragging the soul to an unknown ocean of mixed experiences. It is this ignorance which is responsible for our birth, old age, death, and rebirth. It existed primarily as a formless idea in Prakriti, and secondarily as a force acting through the various manifestations of nature. The association of soul with matter is the opportunity for the unloosing of this strange demon of ignorance by tying the soul to the body, thereby causing it to undergo the pangs of rebirth. The soul, according to Kapila, is the king of nature. Your feelings, your surroundings, the world, and all the powers of the universe must offer up their homage, their secrets, to your highest spiritual need. Your real self has not only the knowledge, but also the power to separate itself from the false self and to rise above the reach of the compelling force of universal gravitation, thereby returning to its home of peace and light and love. The law of karma, by which every thought, word, and deed, like a seed thrown on fertile soil, produces its fruit in life after life, determining the quality of the brain, affections, and impulses, is not half as potent as the potency of self-knowledge. Ignorance is the mother of all our sorrows. Sin is ignorance. Cruelty is ignorance. Selfishness is ignorance. Be not selfish, but be a knower of the self. A selfish man is he who is ignorant of his true self, but he who knows the self has realized the difference between the eternal and the temporal self, the real self and the unreal. Self-knowledge is the source of blessedness. Self-government gives supremacy. Self-control confers contentment, and the vision of the self reveals the absolute I am. After its evolution from avyakta, the undifferenced primal matter, prakriti becomes mahat, the great monad or intelligence. Mahat is a substance which has 8 attributes. 1. Righteousness and its opposite. 2. Unrighteousness. 3. Knowledge and its opposite. 4. Ignorance. 5. Dispassion and its opposite. 6. Passion. 7. Supernormal power and its opposite. 8. Powerlessness. Mahat may be taken to mean the transcendental ground or impersonal source, the metaphysical hypothesis, or inconceivable substratum of our personal mind. Mahat is the first determination of the indeterminate substance containing the qualities of goodness, power, wisdom, and temperance. Ahamkara is the second determination of the primal indeterminate. The diffused rays of the universal mind become concentrated and are narrowed down to the limits of self-consciousness. As the Hindus teach that God becomes man to save the world, so Kapila teaches that Mahat becomes Ahamkara, the universal becomes individualized. Ahamkara is the belief that I am the conscious subject who is experiencing the sensations of sound, light, heat, smell, etc. In order to understand the nature of Ahamkara, we must first understand the psychology of perception. The ego is the center to which all perception is referred. All feelings of happiness or unhappiness, success or failure, are claimed by the ego. Not only the pleasures and pains of my own body, but also those of other bodies are superimposed upon the ego. A man becomes unhappy when his wife or children are ill. The ego claims all experience, whether spiritual or social, whether physical or mental, as its own. The distinction between subjective and objective experience is due to ahamkara. The ego is this which I feel within myself. The non-ego is that which is outside myself. Everything has an individuality of its own in this world. Water has an individuality of its own, fire likewise, and virtue and vice. We see the individuality in things because we are conscious of our own individuality. Mental individuality manifests itself in good, bad, or indifferent deeds. But this ego is phenomenal and unreal. It is not our true and abiding self. The 5 tanmatras arise out of the ahamkara. What are these tanmatras? They are the essences, radicals, atoms, and fine forces, which are the cause of the grosser elements as well as the causes of our perception of the external world. Hence, the Tanmatras are the psychophysical or neurophysical waves which carry messages from the sense centers to the mind. They are the intermediate links which connect the ego with the non-ego, the subject with the presentation. They are 5 in number because there are 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Each Tanmatra differs in quality from the other. The Tanmatra of sound is different from that of light, and so on. But one Tanmatra is enough to account for the diversity within it. E.g., one Tanmatra of sound carries all varieties of sound, such as the different musical notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. So with light, heat, and smell, etc. The Tanmatras are followed by the 16 mikaras, or modifications, consisting of the 5 organs of perception: the ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose, and the 5 organs of action: the voice, hands, feet, the organ of excretion, and the organ of generation. The mind is the 11th organ, whose function it is to direct and control the organs of perception and action. The mind receives messages and sends them. The mind ascertains facts, and the mind doubts. The 5 Mahabhutas, or gross elements, are solid, liquid, heat, gas, and ether. They are also named earth, water, light, air, and ether. Earth has 5 qualities: sound, touch, color, taste, and smell. Water has 4: sound, touch, color, and taste. Light has 3: sound, touch, and color. Air has 2: sound and touch. Ether has 1: sound. These are the 24 tattvas, or principles, enumerated by Kapila to explain the evolution of the universe. Purusha, or soul, is the 25th principle and possesses the following characteristics. The soul is eternal, without end or beginning, subtle and indivisible, uncreated. The soul is a seer because it sees the evolution of nature. It is transcendental because it is above space, time, and causality. It is unaffected by goodness and evil. It is unproductive because immaterial, and many because infinite in number. The highest aim of life is to isolate the soul from nature, to raise it above the perception of time and space, and to liberate it from false self. This aim can be realized by training the soul by means of the discipline of dispassion, righteousness, superhuman power, and knowledge. Nature is not a hindrance, but a help to its progress. When the soul achieves mukti, or liberation, it rests in its own glory, wisdom, freedom, and peace.